The River Clyde is the third longest river in Scotland. Starting in the hills of Dumfries and Galloway, it flows through Lanarkshire before becoming tidal in Glasgow, emptying out into the Firth of Clyde and then into the Irish Sea. Being tidal throughout most of Glasgow, a large industrial city, made the river incredibly important in the city's shipbuilding industry. Those working in the shipyards needed something to do in their spare time, however, and so in 1877, they formed a football club that would play on the banks of the Clyde and would therefore be known as Clyde FC. See, the geography lesson did have something to do with football. Whilst Clyde are a Glasgow club at heart, for nearly 40 years they haven't had their own stadium in the city, and for the past 30 years they haven't even been playing home games in Glasgow. A club who spent a large part of their history in the top flight, somewhere that they haven't appeared since 1975, along with having won 3 Scottish clubs, Clyde are a club who appear to be on the brink, sitting near the bottom of League 2, a league they nearly finished bottom of last season, which could have seen them drop out of the SPFL after being a member since 1891. So, in this video, I'll be looking about how a historic side from the south side of Glasgow, who were once considered a top flight regular, have had one of the most bizarre 40 years, effectively becoming a mercenary club, with multiple ground shares, merger talks, finding a ground before eventually getting kicked out, and now the financial hole that they have found themselves in. Clyde were founded in 1877 and started life at Bowerfield Park in Dalmarnock. There are no images of this ground, but if you want to visit the site, the coordinates listed for the stadium according to Wikipedia take you to Solway Street, which is under development. During their time here, they would play in the Scottish Cup but weren't part of any leagues. Whilst the Scottish Football League was founded in 1890, Clyde wouldn't join until the following year, becoming one of 4 teams from Glasgow in that year's competition, joining Celtic, Rangers and Firth Lanark. In 1898, Clyde would move stadiums for the first time, leaving Bowerfield to move across the river to what would be considered their real home in Shawfield. Technically, Shawfield isn't in Glasgow, with the stadium lying just inside Rutherglen, but let's face it, Rutherglen is another part of Glasgow anyway. Between this move and World War I, Clyde would rise out of the second division, even though there were seasons where they either won the league or finished runners-up, but there were no automatic promotions and relegation, and would end up becoming one of the best teams in the country. Between 1908 and 1913, they would be runners-up twice in the Scottish Cup, losing to Dundee in 1910 and Celtic in 1912, and they would reach 2 more semi-finals and would finish 3rd in the league in the 08-09 season and 1911-1912 season. Post-war, however, would see the club drop back into the second division for a couple of seasons before returning to the top flight, maintaining their status as a mid-table side throughout the 1930s. During this era, however, Shawfield would see a major change that would later on have massive implications for the club. Greyhound racing became massively popular in the 1920s, and football clubs would rent out their facilities to allow races to take place as a way of earning extra money. A company would try and get a lease at Shawfield, something which would have support of the chairman, but the league were not fans of this idea, along with contractual issues around the stadium itself. Eventually, the deal would go through, but the ground would be bought by Shawfield Greyhound Racing Company. This effectively made Clyde tenants to whoever owned the ground, but receiving a share of the gate money from races meant the club were able to avoid liquidation in 1930, along with being able to build a squad capable of winning their first major honour, the 1939 Scottish Cup, beating Motherwell 4-0 in front of 94,000 people at Hampden. Clyde would reach another cup final in 1949, losing to Rangers, but the 50s would see the club bounce between divisions. This league form did not translate to the cups, however, as they would win the Scottish Cup in 1955 and 1958, beating Celtic and then Hibs, along with 2 more semi-finals in the competition, along with 2 semi-final appearances in the League Cup. They would finish 3rd in the league once more, which would normally see them qualify for Europe. In this case, it should have been the Intercities Fairs Cup, but because Celtic also qualified, Clyde couldn't compete as only 1 team per city was allowed in the competition. Clyde disputed this by saying they are from Rutherglen, which is North Lanarkshire and not Glasgow, but UEFA pointed out that the club were registered under the Glasgow FA, not the North Lanarkshire FA, so were kept out. The 60s would see the club remain a top flight team, but off the pitch, problems were beginning to arise. When it comes to gaining fans, Clyde has had to struggle with the fact that Celtic Park is just over a mile from Shawfield, along with people choosing to support Rangers. This problem was exacerbated in the late 60s. Slum clearances would take place in Bridgeton, Dalmarnock, Gorbals, Oatlands and Rutherglen, areas that were considered to be the core supporter base for Clyde. The 70s, meanwhile, would be a very messy affair. Hamilton Accies were in such dire financial straits that they resigned from the league and tried merging with Clyde, but this didn't happen and Hamilton rejoined the league anyway. Dumbarton tried merging with Clyde, but the move was blocked by the league as they saw it as Dumbarton trying to skip from the second division to the first division. The 1974-75 season would see Clyde finish 16th in the first division, dropping into the first division. The Premier Division was introduced as a new top flight for the 75-76 season, making the first division the second tier and the second division the new third tier, leading to this weird quirk where you get relegated to a division of the same name. Clyde were determined to get relegated from the first division, however, and would finish bottom, seeing them drop into the second division, now the third tier. Now, remember how I mentioned that Shawfield was sold to Greyhound Racing Companies? Well, since 1963, Greyhound Racing was in decline due to the allowal of off-course betting. This caused a significant decline in revenues, money that was needed to maintain the stadium. Because of this, the ground got taken over by the Greyhound Racing Association, who were basically a glorified property development company. 1983 would see Shawfield be put up for sale, with Clyde being told they had to leave the ground by 1986. Clyde would spend 5 seasons at Firhill, home to rivals Partick Thistle, before a new opportunity would appear. Clyde would find themselves a new permanent home in Cumbernauld. I know that sounds like a punishment, but the Cumbernauld Development Corporation wanted a stadium with a professional team to fill it, a bit like Milton Keynes. As Wimbledon were effectively homeless and moved to Milton Keynes, Clyde were homeless, and after 2 years sharing with Hamilton Academical, they would move into the brand new Broadwood Stadium with a capacity crowd of 6,000 watching the first game in the new stadium, coincidentally, against Accies. While Clyde would drop to the third tier in 1998, they would soon return to the second tier, and then in the 2003-04 season would end up fighting for the title. There were 2 major issues behind the scenes, however. Broadwood has a capacity of 6,000. The SPL required a minimum of 10,000 seats. This led to talks with Kilmarnock about a potential ground share, along with talks with North Lanarkshire Council about expanding the ground. The council agreed to expand the stadium, but this never went beyond the groundworks for one very good reason. Clyde had no money. Clyde would fail to get promoted and a fans' trust would come in with other investors to take over the club. Clyde would remain in the first division until being relegated in the 08-09 season after finishing bottom of the league. This would once again see financial troubles arise, and in a bid to avoid administration, the entire first team got released. This went exactly as you'd expect. Clyde would finish bottom, seeing them relegated to the third division, where they would then finish bottom. Luckily, this was before the relegation playoffs were introduced, so they avoided the potential fate of dropping out of the league entirely, which would have surely seen the end of the club. Another plan to help fix the financial issues was voted through by the board in 2013. A plan to move, once again, this time to East Kilbride. Obviously, this plan didn't go through, but could you imagine if he just started going around new towns every 20 years like some weird NFL franchise? They wanted to rebrand as EK Clyde, so can you imagine a Glenrothes Clyde or an Irvine Clyde? Clyde would eventually stabilise in League 2 before eventually returning to League 1 after winning the playoffs in the 2018-19 season. It's these last 6 years, however, where things have once again gone completely off the rails. The 1920 season would be ended prematurely due to the COVID pandemic and would not restart, meaning Clyde finished 7th, which for a promoted team is decent. The following season saw the club finish 8th, 1 point above Dumbarton in the relegation playoff spot. 2021-22, however, would see them finish 8th again, but they were sitting in 6th when they ended up losing their captain and top scorer on deadline day in the January transfer window. This move, however, caused a complete binfire across the media, along with major politicians, including the first manager at the time, Nicola Sturgeon, calling out, because the man who was sold was David Goodwillie. Badcock, as I am going to refer to him for the rest of this segment before never talking about him again, was convicted of rape in a civil court, but not a crown court. This means it is likely that Badcock did rape his victim, but the level of evidence required in a crown court is a lot higher, and considering the fact that less than 1% of rape cases lead to a conviction, it's of no surprise the criminal case didn't go anywhere. We could talk about reform of the justice system so perpetrators actually get punished, but Badcock would never play at a professional level again, with him being at Plymouth Argyle at the time of conviction. He would join Clyde and play 140 games for them, and before anyone says, yes, there were objections to this. If you went to a game involving Clyde during this time, there would be chants about Badcock's crimes coming from opposition fans. After not playing a game for Rafe due to fan boycotts, there was an attempt to loan him back to Clyde. This led to the women's team resigning, and North Lanarkshire Council threatened to kick the club out if he was to return. Which does make you question why this didn't happen before. This isn't me being sympathetic to Badcock, fuck him, but did everyone involved just sort of forget until this happened? Anyway, the loan didn't happen, and Badcock is now way down the pyramid, away from any media attention and hopes of professionalism. Clyde, meanwhile, would leave Cumbernauld in 2022 anyway, once again meaning the club would be without a permanent home. Their new temporary home would be at New Douglas Park, meaning that once again the club would ground share with Hamilton Academical. Their first season at New Douglas Park would see the club drop down to League 2 after being defeated by Annan in the playoffs, but attendances were roughly the same as what they were in their last season at Broadwood. Their first season in the fourth tier, however, would see the club almost end up in back-to-back relegation playoffs, with the club sitting over 10 points behind 9th in November. Ian McCall, however, would be able to turn it around, with the club finishing 3 points clear of Stranraer, who they beat on match day 32 to lift themselves off the bottom of the table. In the second half of the season, Clyde won 8 and drew 6 of their last 18 games, and it was hoped that with their recruitment in the summer, the club could make a promotion push. This did not go to plan, however, with Ian McCall being sacked after 10 games with the club sitting 9th, only above a struggling 4th side who would also go on to sack their manager Ray McKinnon. Financial issues would rear their head once again, however, as in the beginning of December 2024, the club announced their Back the Bully We campaign, as there was a financial deficit of £55,000. The club would raise the required funds just after Christmas, but it does highlight a worrying trend in lower league football. Fellow League 2 strugglers Forfar put out a fundraiser to help with transfer funds, Bonnyrigg put up a fundraiser for a new pitch, Dumbarton and Inverness are currently in administration, and Edinburgh City last season were in a financial mess. With the impacts of COVID, where we had a whole season played behind closed doors, financial struggles are starting to catch up with clubs, especially at the lower levels. Whilst blame could also be put on the clubs themselves for not living within their means, higher-ups will claim they have to do this to remain competitive. As mentioned in my video talking about pitches, the gap in wealth between Celtic, Rangers and everyone else is astronomical. It would certainly benefit the game to have a greater wealth distribution model throughout the leagues, along with reform of the league system as a whole, but that's a topic for another video. But questions have also had to be asked of those running the clubs. Financial sustainability seems to be a forgotten practice in Scottish football, with clubs chasing short-term glory at the expense of long-term stability. Surely something needs to change. Maybe something along the lines of profit and sustainability rules in England or financial fair play in UEFA competitions. Because I am sick to death of talking about clubs in financial difficulties. Please stop. That's all for this video, and of course I hope you enjoyed. What do you think the future holds for Clyde? Should some form of financial regulation be brought in to help clubs avoid these situations? Let me know in the comments below. Of course, liking, sharing and subscribing are all appreciated, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.